All right, thanking God again, this time for courage, not the courage that we can muster, but the courage that comes from God in chapter 2, where he's going to seem to encourage, at least I'm going to interpret it as encouraging Ezekiel not to fear the job that's ahead of him in this chapter that I'd like to call low key, because the drama facing Ezekiel in some ways is going to be low key, in addition to the very obvious threats he is going to face in response to the words he's about to say. In this chapter that begins out in the first verse, with God telling him to stand on his feet because he is literally floored by what he saw in the presence of God. In chapter 1, in verse 2, God is indeed going to speak to him in verse 3, cautioning him about his audience. One, they have a history of being rebellious, but it's not just a history, because even to this day, their descendants are also, as it's going to say in verse 4, impudent and stubborn. However, in spite of his audience, verse 5, it's going to say that Ezekiel's work among them is going to pierce any kind of denial they might have, because whether or not they hear his words, they will know that a prophet has been among them. Therefore, their denial is not going to stop them from realizing that God is actually the one doing the speaking. However, because of the words that Ezekiel is going to speak on behalf of God, the response is going to be bitter, I'll call it, because in verse 6, God is going to caution Ezekiel not to be afraid of either them, their words, or their looks. Going on in verse 7 to say, you just focus on speaking his words to them, whether they hear or refuse to hear. And even though Ezekiel is going to be among them, God is going to caution him not to either be influenced by or intimidated by their ways. Verse 8 saying, be not rebellious like that rebellious house. And then he's going to give him what seems to be a strange instruction. As we mentioned in a recent class, one that seems to be different from the way he gave the word to either Isaiah or Jeremiah. He's going to say at the end of verse 8, eat what I give you. Verse 9, going on to show God giving him a scroll to eat, which leads into a series of even more challenging object lessons that God is going to demonstrate through Ezekiel's life, or the challenges he puts Ezekiel through personally. Understanding that the thing that most caught my attention was the duality and the challenges that Ezekiel is going to have to face, because he is not only going to be given difficult tasks from God, the response, as we have already mentioned, is going to be bitter and challenging in some obvious and also some low-key ways. Understanding that we pointed out in verse 6, God is going to warn him not to be intimidated by them, seeming to refer to them personally, even more their words and then their looks, and reminding me of 3 ways that I have seen ministries intimidated on the mission field and even beyond, especially in environments where a very few people control opportunities and resources. Simply knowing who they are personally can give an added degree of influence to their ability to harm or retaliate against you, regardless of the truth of what you are saying. That influence alone being enhanced by words that can be used either against you personally to intimidate you, or to intimidate anyone who would otherwise be inclined to help you, once again, regardless of the truth of what you're saying. And then finally, once word has been spread that you are on the outs or on the margins or fringes of whatever situation you are in, it doesn't take much more than a look to either intimidate you or to warn others to steer clear of you. All things that God tells Ezekiel not to fear as he moves forward, which, once again, is why we sometimes say, my prayer for you is my prayer for me. God, please strengthen us not to give in to the intimidation of people, their words, or their looks, insofar as they're designed to steer us away from not only the truth, but as we saw in Jeremiah, the best of what you have ahead for us.